In the early morning shift, we had a director named Billie Nix, who was quite a comedian. We also had a fellow by the name of John Spence, who was running camera on that shift. I was doing weather, and we had a series of cue lights that were used off camera to tell me when it was time to break for a commercial. Well, Billie, he thought it would be really funny to see if he could break me up on the air. There was some construction going on in the studio. It was an electric jackhammer off to one side. And Billie's plan was to plug this jackhammer into an electrical outlet, and then just before the camera came to me, while I was still off camera, he would hit this jackhammer and make a terrible racket, and then he would switch to me and just see what happened, you know. What he didn't know was that the jackhammer outlet was also the same electrical circuit that the cue lights were on. So I'm going along doing the weather. He gives me a spot cue. The jackhammer goes off just as loud as you can possibly imagine. I'm told that I looked at the camera and said, well, I guess it's time for a commercial. I don't remember that. I think I blacked the whole thing out. But everybody in the studio, I guess including me, had a great laugh over that.
I do remember my first year at Channel 4, 1982, doing the noon show on April Fools, April 1st, and George Tomek and the McCain brothers. And I decided to play a little April Fool's joke on the audience. And Ron King, who I'm sure some of you remember, was there hanging out, and I told him, I said, Ron, come running in here with wire copy and get right in front of the camera and say, Bob Jr., something's just breaking news across the wire. And he did his job very well, live on the air, and threw some papers at me, and I came on there, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Barry Switzer has resigned, effective immediately, go to work for the Dallas Cowboys. And I went on and on, tried to build out this story, and Ben and Butch and George were like, oh my gosh, can't believe that. And the producer was yelling at me because I had gone long, imagine that, a Barry being windy, and go to break, pitch to break. So I pitched to commercial break. And I never said the magic words, April Fools. Well, oh, that was a long commercial break. I got called to Ron Turner's office during the commercial break, the news director. I was told to run out to the front desk and talk to her because the receptionist was fielding phone calls, and there was a column of paper that said favorable and another column that said unfavorable. I was just getting ripped to shreds for this blockbuster announcement I had laid on the people and not said April Fools. So when they came out of the break, I'm still running around meeting with all these people. They wouldn't even let me back on the air. And George Tomek goes, Bob Jr. was just kidding. It's April Fools, April Fools, ha ha. And Ben and Butch, yeah, he was kidding. It was just an April Fool's joke. Barry Switzer's still working for you. It's great, it's great, it's great. It was a miserable day in my life. United Press International called to confirm the resignation of Barry Switzer. Sports Illustrated called. Mike Treps, who was, had formerly been at Channel 4, was at OU, and called to Bob, what did you say? I was in the shower, and I had to apologize to him. And then they said, your dad wants to meet you out in the parking lot. And Dad came screaming up in one of those old WKY cars, the red and white paint job, and motioning to me, get out here now. And I had to get in the car, and we literally, burned rubber in that back parking lot. Channel. I mean, he was doing laps at about 45 miles an hour, all the time reaching over at me, trying to get at me, and I was shining the passenger door pretty good. He was trying to explain to me how I'd gone too far, how there was a fine line between telling a joke and being a responsible journalist, and I had leaped over the line and all this sort of thing. So the result of that was that I had to apologize publicly on the air at 10 o'clock that night, had to pre-record a 1-minute segment apologizing, and then I was off. Dad made out the schedule. Every April 1st for like the next 5, 6, 7 years, I was off. Huge capital letters encircled every April 1st. So it's a fun story, but I almost got fired my very first year at Channel 4 because of it. Well, as the story goes, Robbie Robertson and I worked together for 18 years. And of course, he worked with my dad forever. And so I just heard about this story. And of course, I giggled because Dad was quite fond of hot dogs. In fact, would make them all the time when he'd come home after the 10 o'clock show, just by throwing a bunch of those gross little skinny pink weenies into a pan of boiling water at home late at night, and I would come running down the stairs and we'd share hot dogs and popcorn. It was a great thing. and we got pretty big because of it, literally. But I do remember this story. Probably told, I guess they went to some football game and they were both all fired up to get some hot dogs, you know, before the game or at halftime or whatever, because they were going to have to haul the equipment and get out of town pretty quick afterwards, or go meet their plane or get in their cars and get out of there. And sure enough, they all had their minds set on these hot dogs that they were going to have after the game. And perhaps Robbie went to fetch them or whatever and found out no hot dogs. They'd run out. And everybody was kind of bummed out because they'd been kind of thinking about it. And they got back either in the plane or the car or whatever. And my dad, when I heard this story, I laughed immediately because somebody said, your dad was wearing binocular cases around his neck. I go, binocular case? My dad didn't even know how to spell binoculars, much less wear them. And as it turns out, Robbie had the real binoculars around his neck. Dad had the case around his neck. And while everybody was kind of grumbling about no hot dogs, Dad opened up that binocular case, and the slots where the binoculars went, he pulled out 2 nice piping hot dogs that he'd had in there that he'd somehow bought before the game or at halftime or whatever, and he just ate them in front of everybody and laughed about it all the way home. So that was him, connoisseur of food, and no one had a stash food. I can't tell you how many times I opened up the cabinets at home in Norman, true story, and Snickers bars would just come flying out like like somebody was in the cabinet throwing them at you. And my mom used to get so mad at him, but then she would say, you know, I love him. I know he's stashing candy everywhere. And he had candy stashed all around our house in Norman.
After I was chief photographer, I, in theory, kind of hired people. I hired a young man as a weekend news photographer. His name was Buchanan. And he was probably a 21-year-old. He was a college student. He worked part-time. And it was in the winter and working on a Saturday, and I was there. And he went to dinner, took a news car, marked news car. And maybe 45 minutes later, after he'd gone to dinner, I got a call from Norm Bagwell. And he says, Darrell, he says, you have a news photographer out for a news car right now? And I said, yeah. He says, is he driving car number 8? And I said, yeah. He says, well, you're gonna get a call from him in a little bit. He's going to tell you that his car has been stolen. And he's going to be very upset. When he does that, listen to him very carefully and then tell him to walk across the street and ring the bell on the brick house right across the street from where he is. He said, I've got his car. This young man had gone to visit a friend and had left the car running outside the house while he was inside talking to his friend. Mr. Bagwell had sat there in his living room and watched this news car at his TV station sitting there idling. And after a while, he had gone and gotten in it, drove it, put it into his garage, and closed the door. Maybe 5 minutes later, I got a call from Mr. Buchanan, almost in tears, saying I've left the car out there. I only left it for maybe a minute. And I listened to him, and after a while, I said, walk across the street, son, see what that man over there has to say. Mr. Bagwell, I think, had a very good day that day. He enjoyed it.
Some of the other people I worked
3,
2. Some of the other geniuses I worked with. That sounds awful.
You're not referring to me. You know, I haven't heard about it.
That sounds like really sarcastic. Some of the other geniuses I worked with.
Metaphor is never sarcastic.
No.
Steve Shouse, the king of sarcasm. Okay.
So we got 3 more shots.
44 minutes we're running. Hey,
Yeah.
3, 2.
Another genius I worked with.
How many things of those in? I'm sorry, they're too good to write.
You better not leave that
I
in.
am.
You better not. I know where you live.
You're going to be long gone.
I know where you live.
3, 2.
I worked at a lot of other places, including 5 other television stations, computer store. Every place I've worked has been a fine place to work, but no other place felt like home than Channel 4 in Oklahoma City.
I did have one interesting thing happen in projection. Perry Como's show was on Saturday evening, and He was sponsored by Kleenex. And at one of the spots at one Saturday, we were to make a special feed to another district, and we were going to feed a special commercial that Perry Como would intro. He would simply say from his show, and now here is a the language was, here's an announcement from our sponsor, Kleenex. And then I would roll the film. The network would be dropped. The telephone company would take our feed and feed it to the West Coast. And so the first night, here it is. I'm ready to go. I've got it loaded in projection, and Perry Como is on, and has done a number or two. And he starts to ad-lib. And they cut him, and they drop the network and drop to us. I didn't roll the film. I didn't have the cue line. We'll be back in just a minute, but first here's a word from Kleenex. Well, the phone started ringing, and I called at that time, Jim Darrell. We called and said to Jim, he was the national sales manager, that we didn't get the feed done we were supposed to because Perry Como didn't give us the cue line, and Boyles didn't roll it. And Jim Darrell said, good, that'll teach him. Next Saturday, same setup, same thing. Here we are again. We're going to feed this spot. Well, Perry Como comes and he does his stuff, and then he comes out and he goes this to the camera, over here. He said, no, come here. He was saying he had the cue card boy bring in the cue card. And he takes it from him and turns it around and does this. We'll be back in a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor, Kleenex. Bang. They drop to us, I roll the film, we get the tape, we get the commercial run. And it was absolutely hysterical.
Billie Nix, a director at Channel 4, he directed a lot of the morning and midday newscasts and had a very quick wit. He was always coming up with some kind of a joke or a quip. Like I remember I was standing in the control room with him once, and there was this really bombastic commercial for some Chevrolet dealership on the air at the time. And when it was over, I said, gee, Billie, do you think they're going to sell many Chevrolets with that? And he turned to me and said, I don't know, but I'm going to sell mine.
I can remember one time we were up in Kansas City, and we were up there covering OSU. I think they were in the Final Four. And Bob at the time was doing radio, and he would have this briefcase that he would carry his broadcast gear in. And he literally just had to plug it in someplace, and he would broadcast using that. So he went up there and he broadcast the OSU game because he was the voice of the Cowboys at the time. And when the game was over, he packed up all of his stuff and he left, and he went out to the parking lot to find his rented car. He was at Kemper Arena. And so he looks around the parking lot, and it occurs to him he has no clue where that car is. Doesn't have a clue what color the car is. And so this is how I learned how Bob looked at life. Instead of getting upset, he went back into the arena. He went by the concession stand, bought 3 or 4 hot dogs, and went up to the top of the arena and sat and he watched the next 3 games from start to finish. And then when it was over, he watched them come in and start cleaning out the arena. And it was at that point that he walked back out into the parking lot, and he took the keys to the car, the rental car, and he put them in the 20 different cars that were left in the parking lot and found his and went home.
One time, apparently, there were a bunch of kids giggling in the back, and he went back and said, what's going on back here? And they made a comment about a kid who had passed some gas. I asked Steve about that later. He swears it never happened, and I've talked to people who say they were watching the day it did happen. I don't know whether it did or not. I was there the day that this happened. Foreman Scotty was coming down the front row of the kids, and he got to one kid and said, "What's your name?" And the kid opened his mouth and just hurled all the way out well into the studio. That happened live on television. And I'll never forget the interesting arrangement, because the kids all scooted back and there was an entire circle of empty seats around him as they moved away from him.
The old color cameras, we'd fire them up early in the morning, around 5 o'clock. And they had, in order to do a noonday show, we had to fire them that early because it would take a long time for those things to stabilize. And then, of course, there would be the time when the engineers would have to sit down and balance them, weighing one camera against the other so that the pictures on both were the same. I would have to say that Aaron Britton, he had the magic eye. He could see colors like no one else could see. Britt, as we called him, Britt had that magical touch. He could tweak a camera, get the very best out of it, match the cameras to where they were almost totally identical. That was a real skill. And of course, I remember the one time when Lester Tucker was balancing the cameras, and he would set up a bowl of fruit down on the stage, point both cameras at the bowl, and there would be a red apple, a yellow banana, maybe a green pear or something like that in the bowl. Well, one day somebody pulled one on Tucker. Tucker set up the bowl, pointed both cameras, and went back up into the control room. Someone was ready. When Tucker got up into the control room, he looked. The pear was green, the apple was red, and the banana was blue. Well, Tucker ran back down on stage. Meanwhile, someone traded the blue banana for the yellow banana. Tucker looked at it, and here it was, down on the stage live. All colors were the way they should be with the yellow banana. Tucker goes back up to the control room. Someone shifted. They put the blue banana back in and ran Tucker back and forth, up and down the sound trap, to the stage, back and forth. This must have gone on for 15 minutes before Tucker finally caught on. But it was a wonderful time. Lots of practical jokes. Well, we had a couple of mobile buses at that time, the old flexible Buick buses, and we had one too many. We had two of them. So we needed to send one of them away, and it went to WTVT in Tampa. Well, some of the innovative people, I think maybe Arne Kattov was involved in this one, where we had a mannequin. And it was a female mannequin, and she was placed in the back of the bus, back where all the camera cables are, and hid very much well away. But if you open the back doors of the bus and look inside, and if you look past the camera cables in a dark corner, you could see Millie. And Millie had a dagger stuck right in her chest and blood draining down from it from the art department. Well, the bus was sent to Florida. And of course, the guys at Florida, they were very interested in what they had procured from WKY. They got to milling around, and next thing you know, in their milling around, they found Millie. Well, all of a sudden, somebody let out a screech and said, "My gosh, there's a body back there." Well, they clambered around and looked, and sure enough, back in the dark shadows was Millie. Well, what did they do? They called the police. Well, here the Tampa Police Department shows up, and the detectives. It made quite a stir, and I understand that the Tampa Police Department, they were not real happy about this, but it was a great joke, wasn't it? we had a great time out there.
There was one scene that we were supposed to be running from the criminals, and there was a little dumpster, and it was oh golly, about the third of the size of the current dumpsters you have where they put trash. And so Denny and I jumped in the dumpster together. Well, we had just had lunch, and one of us let a little wind go in the dumpster. And so I started laughing. Danny did it. He tried to get up, and I wouldn't let him get out of the dumpster. If I was going to suffer, he was going to suffer. So I kept pulling him back into the dumpster, and he'd try to get out, and then I'd try to get out. And we were making quite a lot of racket inside the dumpster, laughing and so forth, and not going to the next scene. Fan went on, and the smoke came on, and Foreman Scotty opened up the dumpster, says, "You jerks," in pretty strong language. It was stronger than that. "Get out of there and get over to the bunkhouse." So we quit laughing, ran to the bunkhouse, and we were supposed to be eating chocolate-covered ants. And we thought they were chocolate-covered peanuts. So we're laying in the bunkhouse floor, and we started laughing again about what had happened in the dumpster. And we're laughing and trying to carry on a conversation like we're supposed to be doing. And so Steve came across the set and clicked his fingers and said, "Shut up." And so we shut up and finally got the scene out of the way. But things like that would happen all the time, especially when Danny and I were together, because Danny loved to ad-lib and play around. I loved to mess around, so we would probably mess up more scenes than we actually got on tape.
There have been some funny things too that, you know, people escort him off the property and that sort of thing. I do remember one story specifically. Now this one wasn't exactly a person coming after him, it was a thing coming after him. There was this doctor, I think, that he was looking into, that there were a certain amount of businesses that were just throwing like files, important and private files of patients, into the garbage. Not shredding them, not doing anything with them. They would just throw them out in the trash. Well, you can't do that. You can't have people's personal information just out for anybody to go into the dumpster and pick up. So at night, he and his photographer at the time, Mark Dillard, would go out into these dumpsters and kind of go through them, literally dumpster diving, to look for these people's personal documents. And almost every single time they would find just big trash bags of people's social security numbers, addresses, information, patient history, all of that just in the garbage. Well, obviously it's not good to have out there. So one time they're doing one of these stories and it's during the day and he's shooting kind of a stand-up in the piece. And so they get this dumpster that they find that's luckily empty, and so he's gonna stand in the dumpster and say, you know, his piece about he's dumpster diving and he's looking out for you. And in Oklahoma, the wind comes sweeping down the plains, and that's just how it is here. So he gets in the dumpster, and his photog has the camera and is waiting for the shot, and he's gonna, you know, stand in the dumpster and say his piece. Well, the wind comes right up behind him as he's in the middle of his spiel and throws the big dumpster lid down right on top of his head. So we have that on camera, and that's very, very nice to have and pretty funny to see as well. So it's not always the people that are after him, it's sometimes the objects he works with as well.
Needless to say, the studio storage facilities, Outback Warehouse, was a crowded place. And with the ring being back there and the bleachers being back there and all that sort of stuff, it took up a lot of room. But we had a disc jockey that worked in the, of course, the radio side upstairs, and he worked the midnight shift, so he was there all night. And so when we would take the stuff out of the warehouse, of course there was a bare spot in the warehouse. Well, this disc jockey, who drove a really fancy, nice car, I think it was a Corvette, he decided that these people coming in for wrestling was going to tinker with his car. So he would slip around and bring his car to the back and drive it up in the warehouse and park it in the warehouse. Well, you know, it was locked up in there, couldn't anybody get to it. Well, that's a good idea, good deal. The only thing is, when we tore the bleachers down, we didn't have any place to put them. See, we just have to leave them sitting out in the open area back there, and then somebody else the next day would have to put them up. Ed Fazell and Claude Maxwell had asked Johnny Dark not to park his car there because it posed a problem, a real problem for us. But, you know, how those disc jockeys are, you know, he continued to do this. And so Ed and Claude had talked to Mr. Duskin about it, Field Duskin about it. And Field had told him, you know, don't park your car there, it's a hazard. Well, Johnny Dark, and being Johnny Dark, he continued to do it. So Ed and Claude, they figured this deal out just real handy. They had a little extra time one Saturday night after they'd got their regular work done. I'm sure they didn't do it on company time. They go out to the warehouse and they physically picked that car up and turned it around and set it back down in that studio. Now, I don't know how they did it. I think they probably figured out with a floor jack and all that, but they were pretty husky guys. They turned that car around. Well, needless to say, Johnny Dark about had a stroke over that deal and reported them to the powers that be and went upstairs and told Field Duskin, you know, they had messed with his car and all that. And Mr. Duskin just told him, said, well, you shouldn't have been parking there in the first place. That was the end of that story. We did live show 12:25 every day. I'm sure everyone knows on-the-air personality would come in and do a 30-minute show or whatever. They had lots of live music and things like that was on. But this particular on-the-air personality was prone to partake of the grain on a pretty regular basis. You know, one day, I think Arne Kattov probably instigated the whole deal, but this particular on-the-air personality would drive in with his little foreign sports car and park in the back every day. And he would get out, come in and do the show. And before he came in, he'd kill a half pint of orange-flavored vodka. Tuned him up real well. Then he'd come in and do the show, and then when he'd leave, he'd go back out and kill the second half pint of orange-flavored vodka, and away he'd go. Well, one day, Ed Frizzell, I'm sure he was involved with it, myself and a couple other guys, we go out and pick the back end of his little MG up, and Arne puts blocks under the axle. So when the on-the-air personality came out and got in his car, he couldn't go anywhere. He sat out there and raced the motor. Of course, it was a lot of fun. It was hilarious. Pretty soon, though, you know, we'd laughed so long and so hard, we decided we better go help him out. So we go out and give the car a shove, and away he goes. We never did do that anymore, but it was a fun time, you know, and we had fun with that particular person. And you know, things happen spontaneously in live television. On the air, things happen that you have absolutely no control over. And one of those things happened one night on the news set. We had gone through the news and all that, and the sports announcer, I guess it's all right for me to name him, his name's Ross Porter. Excellent news broadcaster. But he memorized everything he said. He never would glance down at his paper. But he always had it. And he would sit there and he'd do the news, the sports. One day, an extraneous fly got in the studio, and he did a number on Ross. I mean, literally did a number on Ross. He crawled all around and all around. Now, I was on the weather camera that night, and I think John might have been on the news camera that night. But anyway, John Spence, very nice fellow. The director was having a stroke. Get a fly swatter, we gotta get a fly swatter, get that fly. And you could hear him outside the cans. And I knew that was distracting Ross, even though the fly wasn't. It was crawling around on his face and all around. And he never brushed at it or anything. He just let it go. So I would go out the back door of the studio to find a fly swatter. There was probably 500 fly swatters around that area, but I couldn't find one. The only one I could find was one in the art department, hanging on the wall in the art department that I'm pretty sure Arne had made, and it was made from a piece of screen wire about this wide and had a long handle on it. It was probably 3 foot long. So I thought, I can get that fly with this. So I go back in the studio. Well, the weatherman, Bob Thomas, had already come into the set and was drawing on the sets, you know, all these little stuff and everything. But he sees me go by the back of the camera with this fly swatter on my shoulder. I don't know how we ever got through the weather that night, because it broke Bob Thomas up so bad that he went out the back door before we got to him because he was laughing so hard. And he came back in, and like I said, I don't know how we ever got through the weather. We never did get to fly. It may be still in that studio out there as far as I know. But that happened I know that it's unreal to think that happened, but it really did happen. I was there that night and saw and I'm sorry to say that I was the cause of Bob Thomas being broke up that night, but he really was.
I think back about so many wonderful, talented people I met there, all the way from, what a great guy, you know, Doyle Glazier, Arne Kattov in the art department. This was before computers. They were living, walking, breathing computers that could do it and do it beautifully and do it quickly and have the artwork there, you know. And Arne Kattov, we used to sit for hours in the coffee shop. And Imogene, remember her, the lady in the coffee shop that made all that wonderful food? We had our own little cafeteria there. You could go down and have lunch. And when I first went to WKY, had a really short haircut. I just had no idea what to look like, what to dress like, anything. And Arne Kattov said to me, I'll never forget what he said, something really wonderful to me in the coffee shop once. He said, I got to tell you something. He said, when you get older, you're really going to be ugly. I swear to you, Arne Kattov, one of the most beautiful people in the world.
Well, about 2 or 3, 4 weeks go by, and I see Mr. Bagwell, and I say, Mr. Bagwell, where's that watermelon? You got the machines in. I haven't seen no watermelon in the machines yet. We're gonna have some watermelon, I'll see to it. Another week or 2 go by. Well, it got to the point that I don't care where I saw him. Chamber of Commerce meetings, if I was down covering it, if I was at the Coplin, run into him, wherever he may be, I might just say, Mr. Bagwell, still waiting on that watermelon. So we go on like that for about 2 or 3, maybe a month or 2. But one day, Darrell, Barton, and I, we were out covering a fire. And we could see the smoke from the distance, and I mean, it was going, it was cooking. So the closer we get to the fire, we get our cameras and everything ready, and about time we're about 1.5 blocks away from the fire, and Jack Ogle come on the 2-way radio. KKPA 37, class 16. Yeah, go ahead. Oliver. Yeah, Darrell with you? Yeah, I said, well, we need y'all to head back to the station right away. We're less than 1 block away from the fire. Let us get some B-roll here. Nope, forget the fire. Get back right now. What in the world is going on? So we turn around, head back to the station. Oh, about 5 or 10 minutes into the drive, you come on the radio again. Where are you? Say, we're about, 3 or 4 minutes away from the station. What's going on? Don't worry about that. Just come on in. Darrell, I want you to drop Oliver off at the front door. Oliver, they need you upstairs. You need to go upstairs, see Mr. Bagwell right quick. And Darrell, you bring the car around, and I need to talk to you. And both of us are wondering, well, what in the world is all this about, you know, to be called off a fire? So I go upstairs, and I'm sitting outside in the front office there, and I can't think of the lady's name now. At the time, who was the secretary, said, just a minute, Mr. Bagwell will be with you in just a minute. So he comes out of the door, out of his office, and look at me, and I'm sitting down. He said, oh, you here? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, come on in. So I go into the office, and Mr. Bagwell says, have a seat. And I have a seat there, and he says, he has this little button up on his desk, and he pushes the button, and once he pushes the button, the door shuts behind you. Bam! Oh my God, what in the world is going on? How you like working here? I said, I love it. I mean, it's, like I said, this is a great job. You like Arne? Arne treating you okay? Yes, sir. And what about Jack? Is everything okay downstairs with you? I said, yeah. I said, well, tell me this, and why in the hell do you make so much trouble around here then? About this time, the phone rang. And I know it's that he answers the phone. He says, whoever he's talking the phone with, hey, let me call you back. What's that area code? So that gave me a clue of, you know, I'm in hot water now. This man is dropping a long distance call to talk to me. And if you didn't know Mr. Bagwell used to be a government agent. He guarded the President of the United States. Stern eyes, long bushy eyelashes. I can see him right now. And he's saying, well, why in the hell do you make so much trouble around here? About this time, I could see every bill. I just bought a house. I hadn't been in my house 2 months yet. I could see all these bills just flashing in my face. You know, everybody says when you die, you see your life flash in your face. I saw the bills flashing in my face because I knew I was getting fired. He said, well, come on downstairs here. I'm just tired of this, son. I'll go all the way downstairs with him, and he's talking, and I have no earthly idea. I mean, I don't know. From walking out of his office and going downstairs, I do not remember one step. I just remember walking into the coffee shop, and everybody in the shop, the whole entire station, everybody was in the coffee shop hollering, we got our watermelon, we got our watermelon. And man, they had a joke on me. Mr. Bagwell had gone out and bought about 4, 5, or 6 big watermelons, put them on ice, and we just had a big party at the station. Those are the kind of people that I work with. Kind of people that I love.
I met some very, very interesting people there at Channel 4, and of course one of my favorite, and right off the bat, of course you have to work very closely with your directors. And at that time I had the honor of working with Mr. Billie Nix, and Billie was just a remarkable, remarkable director. Sense of humor that wouldn't quit. And one of my favorite Billie-isms, we used to call them, was there was a serious, serious story that broke one morning on the early morning news. At that time there was, I think, 6:30, 7 o'clock news, and then at midday, and then of course the late afternoon. The early morning news broke with someone wanting to find out more information on a motorcycle that had been found submerged just off of the shoreline there at Lake Hefner, I believe it was. Might have been Lake Oberholzer. But they were asking anyone that has any information as to who might be the owner of the motorcycle, if there might have been an accident, or if someone might know the owner, or that he's missing, anything like that, please let the police department know. And it was a very serious story, and being one not to ever pass up an opportunity, I said, oh my goodness, Billie. And Billie seriously goes, what? I said, I think I know who it is. Billie says, hold on everybody, hold on, stand by. Roy thinks he knows who it is, that this is important. Hold on, guys. Roy, who is it? I said, I think it's Evil Cousteau. At that point, Billie lost it. You could hear the roar down on Studio B, and we had to go to a commercial shortly afterwards. But that was the type of humor that Billie just coaxed out of people. He enjoyed interacting with all the people that he worked with, and it was really a lot of fun. What a great man he was. A lot of the stories that I have are funny things, getting to know people and blend in with personalities. And another one that I like to tell is Mr. Bagwell at the time was our station manager, and he was ex-FBI agent. And he was walking in the studio one day, and I couldn't, again, he was smoking he always smoked these very expensive big cigars, and he came in smoking from the back, and I walked up to him and I said, Mr. Bagwell? He said, yes, Roy. I said, do you have change for a 20? He said, yeah, sure, I think I got it right here. I said, well, could I borrow 10? And he started laughing at that point, and as a matter of fact, about a week and a half later, he came up to me and he goes, Roy, and he's got his big cigar in his mouth. I said, I want you to know, says, I'm the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce downtown, and I used your story you used on me, and said it got a resounding results. And so he was very proud of the fact that he got a big laugh out of the people. So he was a good man as well.
A couple of humorous moments occurred in my television career. I remember on Saturday afternoons in the fall, I would host a 15-minute college football scoreboard show on Channel 4. And the idea was that during the show, since Coca-Cola was sponsoring it, they put a Coca-Cola machine out on the stage. And at some particular point in the show, I would walk over, and I think I put a dime in the machine to have the Coca-Cola come out. And then I'd pick up the Coca-Cola, take a swig or two, say how outstanding Coca-Cola was, and you should go buy it. One Saturday afternoon, I put the dime in, and nothing came down the chute. And here I was. That's what you know when you have live television, you have to ad lib. So I said, hey, apparently the Coca-Colas have been taken by everybody else. I didn't get mine today, but please go out and buy your Coca-Cola. The other humorous, I guess you could call it, moment on television for me occurred one night when I was in the midst of the 10 o'clock sports report, and all of a sudden I felt a fly on my face, and the fly went all around my face. He didn't miss anything. I was so certain that nobody at home could see that fly that I didn't bother to swat it or do anything else. I just continued to do my sportscast. My wife was at home watching and going crazy as she watched the fly traverse around my face. But little did I know until the show was over that I was on with the fly the whole 4 minutes that I did the sports. But that was, again, one night that I would not forget in television.
Our audio guy was Roy Ramirez, who was dangerous, to put it mildly. He didn't have enough to do with his creative mind, and so he did other things as well. And he would screw you up sometimes just for the fun of it, which was to the delight of the rest of the crew, although they were much more low-key than that. And so Roy and I had our times, but I saw him at Russell Pearson's 100th, and we had a great reunion. But Roy would write copy for the Wallace Wildlife Show promos, and one of them was, "Catch your limit of fish and more with dynamite. Learn how on the Wallace Wildlife Show Tuesday at 6:30. Or learn how to field dress a game ranger," or whatever it may be. And then he would also take the company directory, and around everybody's picture he would draw a character. And he drew Billy Nix with little wings on him and a little halo. And he drew one guy who was real heavy with a crane tipping over on him.
Houston Hall won News Photographer of the Year. And Norm Bagwell said, let me handle the presentation. Just tell him to come in the station and come up to my office. So I got on the radio and told Houston to come in and see Norm. And there was this pause on the radio. And Houston says, "What does he want?" Norm Bagwell was a former FBI agent, and he had a way of looking at you that you thought he knew everything in your mind. I suppose he developed that in interrogation skills. Anyway, Houston came into the station parking lot on 2 wheels and came bursting through the door. "What does he want? What does he?" "I don't know, Houston. Go up and see him." Oh, he was eating a cigarette as he tore out of the newsroom. Went up to Norm's office. Norm kept him Norm told me about it later. Norm kept him waiting for a few minutes and then led him into his office, sat him down, gave him that flat look, and asked him, "Houston, what have you been up to?" And Norm said, "He started to tell me."
One time I was anchoring the weekend news, and Bob Berry Sr. was working on a late breaking story involving OU, and I was wondering where he was. Trying to stretch a little bit in order for him to sit down in the chair. Finally, he came huffing and puffing and sat down next to me and started doing the sports. Well, I looked over and I noticed that I guess he had been shaving right before he came on and nicked himself because he had a cut right above his lip, and blood started trickling down his mouth. And after the show, I said, "Bob, couldn't you feel it?" He said, "Bella, I could taste it." And our phones lit up with people calling and saying, "What's wrong with Bob Berry? Was he in a fight or something?" because he was bleeding. That was a funny story. Another one was when the legislature was meeting in a special session and somebody put the wrong film in. So while I'm saying that lawmakers had to work overtime this weekend, they cut to a tape from the Oklahoma City Zoo, and I had a lot of monkeys flying from the trees. So.
Ronnie Kaye was one of the top ones for sure.
Mrs. Kaye's baby boy, they called him, but he was really good. He had a show called Hello Oklahoma. I remember he called and make these crazy calls. He called a massage parlor one time and said he had a group of midgets in town for a convention and wanted to know if he could get the cost down to half price.
Jack Ogle, though, was probably my favorite. You know, he'd always come in, he'd look disheveled, his tie would be undone, and he was just so believable on the air. But after we basically lied my way into my first job. I remember when I finally got on TNT, was doing the NBA, and I came back in town, and somebody did a story on me in one of the newspapers, and I relayed the story how Steve Newman basically shot my audition tape and wrote it and all that. And I get this call, and I go, hello, and they go, Ron Thulin? I go, yeah, it's Jack Ogle. I said, oh, Mr. Ogle. I still couldn't call him Jack. I mean, to this day, I have problems calling him Jack. I said, oh, Mr. Ogle, how you doing? Haven't heard from you in a while. And he just paused. He goes, I saw the article. I said, what article? And he goes, about you. I said, you did? And he goes, yeah, you lying son of a gun. I knew you didn't shoot that stuff. So he actually knew that Steve Newman shot my audition tape.
Oliver Murry was a great fella, and I'd like to see him more nowadays because he had a raspy voice that you probably already heard. Well, Oliver always liked to be the center of attention, whether he's on the field, out in the field doing a story, running a camera, running the production truck, or coming back inside and chortling like a magpie, just walking around the room. One day we were sitting around and Oliver was yakking away and we had a fella there that Channel 4 that used to like to answer the telephone first. And so somebody called one day and it was some kind of a call and the guy was getting nettled because Oliver kept talking away as Oliver normally did. And so the guy turned around and said, be quiet, everybody. Somebody's life may be in danger. And Oliver said, ooh, somebody gonna die.
A lot of times I would take one of those stories that the network had sent down, just a few seconds of a clip, and run it at the end of the show after the sports, and then I would make up a pun about that film. And so we did that, and I kept thinking, I'm going to get called on the carpet for this because we would end the show kind of laughing, and I never did, and that was kind of the funny thing was. But I would hear from people all over town, hey, I saw the pun, I saw, that's a great way to end the show, and so maybe Ernie liked it as well. He never did say anything to me about it, didn't tell me to stop, so we kept doing it. And they were pretty bad. One example that I could think of is we had a film once about a guy that collected thermometers. And he was so proud of them. He had them in his basement, just racks and racks and racks of thermometers. And I thought, what kind of a pun could I make about that? Finally, we ended up with ending the show with the fact that the thermometers that were on the top of the rack, he had to have somebody help him with those because he was only Fahrenheit. And that's how bad they were. But we had fun doing them, and the public seemed to like them, so we didn't get told to stop. When I ultimately did leave Channel 4 in the fall of 1976, that was after I had passed the bar and I'd gotten licensed as an attorney, and decided to go ahead and open my law practice in Edmond, which I did for 30 plus years. The last show that I had, we brought on my replacement, who was Brad Edwards. Brad came in and took over the weekend news anchor, and he brought with him a book, and he said he wanted to present me this book. It was at the end of the show. We were introducing Brad, and he gave me this book, and it was entitled Ray's Best Jokes. And of course, he was quick to open it up and flip through the pages, and of course there was nothing in the book. It was all blank. And so ultimately the best joke was on me, the night that I left.
Brad was a great guy. We all loved working with him, and he always, of course, kept us in stitches with his dry wit and the facial references he could make.
One day I went down to the switchboard, and Ron King and Louise were in deep conversation, and I listened in. He was having trouble with his car, and he was having to take it in all the time because his doors were getting loose, and the mechanic couldn't figure it out, but he was going in and get his car doors fixed again. So later on, Ron came in, and he had his children with him, and he needed to come in and get something out of his office. So while he was up there, Louise looked out, and his children were hanging on the doors. They were just having a ball hanging on those doors. And Louise thought that was really funny. And by the time Ron come back down, they were back in the back seat just like little angels. So Louise told me about the trouble about having that, and said, those kids are hanging on that car door and they have no idea what's causing it. So we laughed about it, and finally Louise told Ron that that's what was loosening his car doors, was children hanging on to it while he wasn't around. We had a laugh over that for ages. Really funny.
1950, when I was doing this show where I interviewed the pioneers that came to Oklahoma, I would break it up at halfway with kids from elementary school, sort of like Art Linkletter's house party. So if you have these kids on one day, they're from like Midwest City, they're from like the kindergarten, the first grade, and I have this little kid on, and I ask him one of my stock questions. What does your daddy do? And the kid says, he's in Korea. I knew a lot of, at that time in 50, they sent a lot of people to Midwest City, sent the men folks overseas and left the families there. And I said, well, that's really great. Your daddy's not at home, so you get to sleep with Mama. I said, I used to sleep with my mama when you're little. It's really great. And the kid said, yeah, I sleep with her every Tuesday night, then Uncle Phil comes over and sleeps with her. Well, that got a lot of reaction, as I'm sure you can believe.
Brad had a great sense of humor. I remember one day he and I were out on a story together. Brad was a photographer, I was the reporter, and he was driving the car, and we stopped at a stoplight, and there was some kids that were standing there, and they were wanting some money, and Brad rolled down the window, and the kid walks up to the window and he says, we're collecting money here to help young children find Jesus. And Brad pauses and looks at him and said, oh, I didn't know he was lost.
Jack Ogle was doing the news one night, and the director asked if he had any water down there, because he was, having a little difficulty speaking, and maybe he was coughing. And I decided that I would try to look around there and see, and lo and behold, I popped up on camera. I don't think anybody will ever forget that, but that was my first time on camera at Channel 4.
We had a Sunday school class, and we had a woman who taught it named Miss, who did the show, and her name was Miss Jane. I can't remember her last name, but she was good. And one time we were doing John Spence and I were running camera. So in the meantime, he started hammering. Boom, boom, boom. Well, Miss Jade would look at the camera, and then she would look off toward Earl. Well, Earl never did notice it, and Miss Jade would try to say things like to change the subject about the banging on the wall.
And it has a hug and a kiss and a hug and a kiss and a hug and a kiss and a hug and a kiss.
So anyway, as time went on, 2 or 3 more bangs. Well, Miss Jane just really stared at the camera. You could tell her expression.
We must get them finished so that we can send the boys and girls their pictures out because we're far behind.
She was very uptight, very mad. And Earl turned around and looked at us and said something like, "Oh my," and stopped. Well, that brought us back to the program, which we did. We were all giggling and laughing, could hardly hold the camera steady. But there's some of the funny things that happened in it.